I'm going to be talking to you today and hopefully have a discussion afterwards about forecasting phenology and establishment risk of invasive species to support early detection efforts. Yeah, so I'm Brittany Barker. I think I will soon be assistant professor of senior research. I'm at the Oregon IPM Center, and I'm happy to see a lot of my crew is here. I see some of my coworkers in the audience, so thank you. So I'll jump right into it. So I wanted to quickly kind of introduce myself first. I have always had a passion for biodiversity and sustainability, environmental health. And so, along with that, I have a passion for reducing the impacts of invasive alien species. So by this, I mean species that are non-native. They come from somewhere else to a location where they're not native to. I do this both in my work and in my personal time. So, as Roshan and I mentioned, I'm at the Oregon IPM Center, which is part of the College of Agricultural Sciences at Oregon State University. And so I work a lot on developing predictive tools and models that can hopefully help us make better decisions for in agriculture. Okay, so specifically models and tools that can help us decide both when and where to act. So for example, where to conduct surveillance, when to manage the species, essentially like timing and also where in space we should focus our efforts. And in my personal time, which I wish I had more of it, but in my free time, my play, I also really love to eradicate those nasty invasive species. So I'm fortunate to have a beautiful home where we have a good amount of property that when we first moved in, I would say about 25% of it at least was infested with invasive plants. So particularly ivy. So I live in Portland, which is pretty close to Corvallis, but I do work remotely most of the time. But so this is in Portland. Notice all of this ivy in this picture from before here where this wheelbarrow is. All of that is ivy. So I'm ripping that out. I'm planting some tall Oregon grape, which is a native species in the Pacific Northwest. And a couple months later, here's a screenshot after where I've ripped out all those invasive plants. I have ferns, tall Oregon grape, a vine maple, and I got my yard certified backyard habitat, and I'm actually going up for the next level this year. I'm going for the gold. Right now I'm a silver. So anyway, invasive species are bad, right? So, there are numerous consequences of invasive alien species. These include economic losses to farmers, ranchers, and society as a whole. It can lead to loss of biodiversity. So those native species that are really important for good ecosystem functioning and also just aesthetically, there's lots of value for biodiversity, also for cultural purposes. Food insecurity for ourselves and our trading partners owing to lower crop production. Invasive species, by reducing ecosystem functioning, we also have land and soil degradation. And this could lead to water pollution and also the soil degradation that can make it harder for native species to come back in, to restore these ecosystems. And this also, if you in Hawaii are pretty, I'm sure, well aware of this, is that these invasive annual grasses in particular can lead to destruction of property and lives, especially via wildfires. So in the Western United States, we have a lot of invasive annual grasses, which you do in Hawaii too. And these are very flammable, and it's making it so that we have an increased number of wildfire. The wildfire cycle is basically increased. So they're more frequent, and oftentimes they're more severe, especially when we have a lot of these dead trees as well. So that can lead to destruction of property, and in the worst case, it can lead to a loss of life. So if left to spread, invasive species, as I mentioned, they can cost billions of dollars to manage, and they can have devastating environmental and economic consequences. So obviously, the best solution is to not let them get there in the first place, right? Prevention, but that can be really hard. So they can evade our prevention efforts. In that case, early detection is our next best opportunity. Early detection is the process of surveying for, reporting, and verifying the presence of a non-native species before that founding population becomes established or before it spreads so widely that we're not able any longer to eradicate that population. After you have detected that pest early, if you have a rapid response, that's where you go out quickly and eradicate that founding population before it begins to spread, right? So early detection, rapid response go hand in hand. Early detection and rapid response also helps us to minimize costly and risky intervention. Here I'm showing a picture of what we call the Integrated Pest Management Pyramid or IPM pyramid. So notice at the bottom of this pyramid here, this is where we want to be. Okay. So as you get towards the top of the pyramid, you want to try to avoid these more these methods that are a little more invasive sometimes, and they can tend sometimes be a little more toxic depending on which chemical you're using. We want to stay towards the bottom. So cultural controls at the bottom here, this is more focusing on prevention measures, such as properly selecting and rotating crops, and also choosing the best varieties of crops to plant and harvesting them at the right time of year. So also another example would be removing dead fruit on the ground to prevent like pests from like laying eggs in them. Okay, so like, as I mentioned, prevention is the best thing for invasive species, but if you cannot do that, right, they've established, we have things like physical and mechanical controls. So as an example, where I was ripping out that invasive ivy, that's an example of just like physically ripping it out, right? But then as the invasive species establishes and begin to spread, it's getting to be so widely, it's becoming more widely distributed. And now we're going to have to use things like biological control agents. We're not able to like eradicate it at this point. It's getting a little more difficult to do that. It's just becoming too widespread. Then also we're getting to the point where we're having to use chemical methods. So like treating the population to kill the individuals, right? So anyway, IPM pyramid, want to stay towards the bottom. Early detection, rapid response can help us do that. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the bulk of my talk here, where I'm going to tell you about some decision support modeling work that I've been focusing on at the Oregon IPM Center. And then I'll provide examples and example applications and evaluate the performance of a modeling tool called DDRP that I have been focusing on at the center. And then third, I'll provide some examples of forecasts for Hawaii. And because I'm sure many of you here in the audience are really interested in how you can use some of these models for Hawaiian pests. And then I'll end by talking about future work and some key points that I want you to take away from my presentation. Okay, so decision support tools are essential for preventing and managing the invasion of these non-native species. Forecasting tools that address when to expect invasive species are really important for early detection efforts because they help us to understand when to expect a certain life stage or a seasonal activity of the pest that is targeted for surveillance. Just as an example here, I'm showing the life cycle of a beetle. So we are going from an egg to a larva to a pupa to an adult. Oftentimes surveillance, not always, but oftentimes surveillance targets the adult stage because adults are out flying around sometimes or just they're just generally more visible, right? So phenology models forecast the development of the organism over its life cycle and its seasonal activities. And this can help us to time our monitoring activities and our surveillance activities and also like management. So some life stages are there. There's typically a life stage that's more susceptible to chemical treatment, right? So we can make sure that we can knock that population back by treating it at the right time of year. Another really important type of a decision support model is a climate suitability model. So climate suitability models forecast the risk of establishment based on climate. So this is taking information about the climatic tolerances of the organism, and this helps us to know where to look, okay? So this can be important. I forgot to mention too with phenology models, it's oftentimes like depending on calendar days is not a very good approach because weather varies so much from year to year. I forgot to mention that with phenology models. And so that's why it's also important to have these like up-to-date like phenology forecasts. These climate suitability forecasts help us know where to look. Here I'm showing a map. This is a climate suitability map for an invasive fungal pathogen that causes boxwood blight. And this was a paper that I published a couple years ago. So I'm just going to walk you through the map here. So areas that are gray or blue, those have either low or zero climate suitability. So the gray areas are climatically unsuitable according to this model. Areas that are more these warm colors like yellow and red, They have this high ecoclimatic index. These are areas that are predicted to be climatically suitable for the development of this particular plant pathogen that is invasive. So we don't know actually where it's native to, but it is invasive in the United States. As you can see, the model here is indicating that especially the eastern part of the US has high climatic suitability for this pathogen. So we want, based on this information, we would say that we would want to like target our surveillance efforts in these climatically suitable areas and not really focus our efforts too much, for example, in the Great Basin or the Southwest that are not predicted to be climatically suitable for this pathogen. Okay, so at the Oregon IPM Center at OSU, a large part of my research over the past several years has focused on this platform, this modeling platform that's called DDRP. It stands for Degree, Day, Establishment Risk, and Phenological Event Maps. And DDRP is distinguished in its ability to basically combine phenology and climate suitability modeling. Most of the tools that are presently available just do one or the other, so this produces integrated maps. And it's designed for real-time modeling. In other words, it uses current climate data. So specifically, we're using data from the PRISM database. So we can get raster, these spatial. So this accepts like raster data, so like this gridded climate data. We have gridded climate data for yesterday, right? So it's like near real time. And then we forecast out to the end of the year. DDRP uses a process-based approach. So in other words, it's not a statistical model. It's based on physiological information about the organisms that we're modeling. It uses degree days to measure phenology or to predict phenology, which is a type of heat unit. And then it uses climate stress, so information about the climatic tolerances of the organism to predict where establishment risk is high on the landscape. And it's open source. It's written in the R programming language. If you're interested, if you're a coder or know somebody who's a coder, feel free to go download the code at my GitHub repo. It's at github.com/bbarker505/DDRP_V2. And you can also find more details about the platform in our PLOS One publication from 2020. So I mentioned that one of the distinguishing features of DDRP is that it addresses both when and where to expect an invasive species, which most other platforms just do one or the other. It accepts daily climate data at any spatial or temporal resolution. As I mentioned, we're using PRISM data, but it can accept data from any source. So I'm going to give an example where I used data from the DayMet data set, right? And temporal resolution just means you can use it for any year. So if you want to do hindcasting, like if you want to take a historical year and produce a model, or run the model, you could do that as well. And it produces extended model forecasts. So we typically forecast out for the entire year, and I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes. It's applicable to many species. So it's not such a complicated modeling platform that you can only use it for one or two species that have similar life histories. We really want to make it general enough that you can use it for multiple different invasive pests. And on the other hand, even though it's not highly complicated, has enough realism in it that we hope that we have evidence that it is predicting with high accuracy. So for example, for model realism, we have a parameter that allows you to have within population variation. So we all know that organisms, there's like, genetic variation in the population. Some develop faster than others, right? So you're going to have like this like distribution of emergence times in the spring, for example. Okay, so just to give you a brief overview before I jump into showing you some examples, there are three major steps in the modeling process. The first is you have your data inputs. So we have a parameter file that has information about the species that you're modeling. This includes temperature thresholds for development, so the lower and upper threshold. It includes data on the climate stress threshold. So like at what temperature do cold stress or heat stress units begin accumulating? We have information about the duration of each life stage in degree day units. And I want to mention here that DDRP has initially been designed for insects. However, we are expanding on it so that it can model weeds and plant pathogens. But right now, it's set up that there's 4 life stages. So we have the egg stage, larva, pupa, and adult stage. And then, as I mentioned too, we have these parameters that allow for within population variation in the emergence times. So we have like different cohorts within each population. The second major input are gridded daily climate data, specifically minimum temperature and maximum temperature. So these are fed into this daily time step in the platform. Okay, so in the daily time step, DDRP separately models phenology and climate suitability. So if minimum and maximum temperatures are within those developmental thresholds, um, then degree days accumulate, and then the model outputs predictions of phenological events, the different life stages that are present on any given day, the number of generations that have been completed on any given day, and also we have estimates of volcanism, so the number of generations per year. And there's also many more outputs that you can access, and I'm going to show you the website in just a minute here so you can see all the different outputs that it produces. In the climate suitability model, this is running at the same time, so it separately measures heat stress accumulation and cold stress accumulation. Specifically, if the temperature, so like if it's too hot, if that temperature exceeds its heat tolerance limit, or sorry, its heat stress threshold, then those units accumulate. If too many of them accumulate, we have this like upper and lower limit. We call it there's a severe climate stress threshold and then a moderate climate stress threshold. Okay. So this is basically when those stress units exceed those limits, then it's going to map out its potential distribution of these areas that are not excluded by moderate stress or severe stress. So like these white areas right here. The dark gray areas where severe stress exclusion is occurring. These are where we have pretty high confidence that climate will prevent long-term establishment of the pest. The gray areas that are predicted to be under moderate stress exclusion, those could be areas where we have a little more, either we're a little bit uncertain, like we're not really positive if it'll be too cold or hot there. It could also potentially indicate that short-term establishment is possible. So on some years, maybe if there's like a cold spell, it might blink out one year and then repopulate the next year, for example. In the post-processing stage, the third step, there's some additional analysis, and then those maps, so the phenology map and the climate suitability map are combined, and then DDRP produces final maps, so final map production. So we have models currently for 16 species of invasive insects. So as I mentioned, so far, most of our work on DDRP has been related to insects. And we also have 3 models for biological control insects. These include Japanese knotweed psyllid, black margin loosestrife beetle, and northern tamarisk beetle. And we have recently developed a model for the fungal pathogen that causes boxwood blight. And so this particular version of DDRP includes moisture factors, which I'll touch on a little bit later. So let's just focus on these invasive insect species right here. Notice, first of all, that many of them, or most of them, are not yet present in the contiguous United States, or CONUS right here. The exceptions are the emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, and light brown apple moth. So emerald ash borer is pretty widespread across the US at this point, at least in the eastern half. Asian longhorn beetle is also, it's established in parts of the east and is continuing to spread. Light brown apple moth is actually, you all, you Hawaiian people, you have light brown apple moth. That species is also present in California. It was at one point in Southern Oregon, but they eradicated it. Notice though, all these other species here are not yet present. So for example, Christmasberry webworm is not in CONUS, although that one is in Hawaii. And like Japanese pine sawyer beetle, we have some tomato pests, so like small tomato borer, tomato leaf miner. Okay, so the reason that a lot of these species are not yet present is because we developed these models to support USDA APHIS PPQ. And this program, they are interested in making sure that these species are detected early, right? So they're using decision support models to help guide their surveillance so that these species do not become established, right? That's the goal. Okay, so this is the homepage for DDRP where you can access the maps. So if you, well, first of all, you'll see a summary of the platform and then a link to the publication and the source code and a user manual. Notice on the very first column here, we have a link to the species directory, and then we have model documentation. So for some species, we have peer-reviewed publications. Others, we just have a technical white paper. We also have a model spreadsheet for all of these that documents our methods. So if you click on here for ALB, Asian longhorn beetle, if you click on that folder right there, you can find all of like, the platform produces like hundreds of outputs, right? So you're probably not going to be interested in most of them, but you can, if you want, go into that folder. And then the rest of the columns here, these are showing thumbnails, so like image files of these different types of phenological events. So we have maps for first spring adults. As I mentioned, oftentimes the adults are targeted for surveillance, and so that's why kind of this first column here is highlighting when we would expect those first spring adults to occur. The second column, we see thumbnails for first egg hatch. This one right here, the fourth column, current stages and generations, that map is showing that on any given day, if you go outside, like if you went outside today, what life stages would you expect to find? And like what generation would they belong to? So these forecasts are updated every 2 to 3 days. So for example, if you look at that current stage and generation map, the date on that is going to change. So like this map right here may have been produced like yesterday or the day before. And then this last map right here, this last column is number of generations per year. So that could potentially provide an indication of how much pest pressure you may expect over the year. So obviously the greater number of generations you have, likely the more pest pressure you're going to have. Okay, so now I'm going to move into talking about specific examples and some applications of the forecast, and also some evidence that the DDRP models are performing pretty well. So the first example I'm going to talk about is Christmas berry webworm, Cryptoblabbes gnadiella. I'm not sure if I'm saying that species name correctly. So Christmas berry webworm is not present in Conus. However, according to my search, my internet search, it is present. I don't know if it's present all across the Hawaiian Islands, but I know it's present on some. It was first detected in Oahu in 1905. So Christmas berry webworm is native to the Mediterranean region. It's extremely polyphagous, meaning that it feeds on many different crop hosts. And it usually attacks fruit that has been injured by other insects, such as scale insects and mealybugs. And these scale insects and mealybugs, they produce a honeydew that the adult females and larvae of the Christmasberry webworm like to feed on. So that's why they're kind of considered this like more secondary pests. So they're co-occur with other pests. So this particular species has been intercepted many, many times at different ports of entry in CONUS. So there is a very high likelihood of it arriving, to CONUS. So here is a forecast for Christmasberry webworm for CONUS, and this is specifically showing first adult emergence for 2024. The first thing I want you to notice here are how much of the CONUS right here is dark, either this dark gray or this light gray. So again, these dark gray areas are predicted to be under severe climate stress exclusion. If we're looking up here up north, these areas are too cold. Areas down in the Southwest, like in Arizona and California, these are areas that are predicted to be too hot. So Christmasberry webworm it's not a very cold tolerant species, as you can kind of, just looking at this map, you can kind of understand that, right? You can tell. So it's primarily going to be the likelihood of establishment is going to be pretty much higher at these like lower latitudes. If you look at these areas that are not excluded by climate stress, you'll see that these are different weeks of the year. So I've organized the dates here by week. So the earliest date of first adult emergence is going to be January 14th. That's all the way down in Florida. As we're getting up here into the southern United States, kind of like moving northward, we're getting into February, March. But then first adult emergence may not happen until as late as June or July or August up in like the Pacific Northwest. Okay, so what are the applications of this? Well, as I've mentioned, adults of many of these insects are targeted for surveillance, right? So if we know when to expect the webworm, we can make sure that those surveillance, those traps are put out on time. Also, for this species, the fact that it's predicted to be excluded from so many parts of CONUS, we can use that information to focus our search efforts. Maybe we shouldn't spend so much time conducting surveillance in these areas that have a pretty low likelihood of establishment. Just as an example here, so these are of kind of talking a little more about climate suitability. These maps right here are from the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey Program. So these are showing the results of their surveys for 4 recent years, so 2020 to 2023. The areas that are green in these maps, these are counties where CAPS did not find. So they were conducting surveillance for Christmasberry webworm, but they did not find it. I just kind of wanted to point out here that look at how many of these counties that they surveyed that were like in these areas that are predicted to be, climatically unsuitable. I'm not saying that's a I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously we want to be like careful. It's better to be careful, it's better safe than sorry. But at the same time, is there potentially, could conducting surveillance in these kind of more high priority areas, could that save us time and money? So that's just kind of something I think that would be good to have a broader discussion about, or just an idea, putting it out there. So as an example, a second example, I'm going to talk about the spotted lanternfly, Lycorma delicatula. So spotted lanternfly is native to China. There is some evidence also that potentially it's been in northern Vietnam, but we definitely know it's in China. It's pretty widespread there. It feeds on more than 100 plant species by sucking the sap out from the leaves, stems, and trunk. It also excretes a honeydew, which causes a sooty mold that impedes photosynthesis of the affected plant. So spotted lanternfly is a high priority pest. It has a high potential for economic and ecological damage. It's present now in 17 US states and CONUS, predominantly restricted to the Northeast currently. So the red in this map right here, the counties that are blue are where infestations are present. The red line in this map indicates a quarantine area, okay? So, but the pest does continue to spread despite these quarantines. So this spotted lanternfly model, we recently finished this. So these forecasts only recently became available. So it's good that I'm talking to you all about this just because it's new. We hope that'll be helpful. This is a forecast of first egg hatch for 2024. So the reason that I'm showing you a map of first egg hatch is because spotted lanternfly overwinters in the egg stage. Eggs can be like you can see up at this life cycle up in the top right corner here. The egg masses, they're kind of like the color of mud. They're kind of like grayish color. I actually haven't seen them myself because I'm in Oregon and spotted lanternfly has been found in Oregon, but in any case, apparently they are a little bit hard to find. But however, look at like the nymphs, especially the late nymph, like it's like this bright red, white, black, right? So they're much more visible than the eggs. So that is going to be key. Finding these nymphs is key for early detection and rapid response, right? So that's why these first egg hatch maps might be important. So this map, first of all, I want you to notice that there are very few areas, at least based on climate data for 2024, where spotted lanternfly is excluded by climate stress. Unfortunately, spotted lanternfly is pretty cold tolerant. It occurs in its native range. It occurs like in northeastern China, which gets very, very frigid, has very cold winters. So that's kind of a bummer. It looks like up in like the Northeast, like up in New England or the parts of like New York and Maine, like at least based on climate data for this year, it doesn't look like cold stress would exclude it from those areas. However, it does look like potentially that some of the very hottest parts of like the Southwest may be climatically unsuitable, but just this kind of like small area of California and Arizona. Okay, so similar to Christmas berry webworm, we see that these events are occurring earliest in Florida just because it warms up so much faster down in Florida. And then as we're getting into these more northern latitudes, we are seeing that first egg hatch isn't predicted to occur as late as June or July. I also just want to point out here, if you can all see my little pointer, notice that there's these white areas. I don't know if you see that. It kind of almost looks like snow on mountains or something. These white areas, this is where not enough degree day accumulation has happened for eggs to hatch. So this is potentially good news. This could mean that maybe, just maybe, spotted lanternfly may not be able to establish in those areas just because it can't complete its life cycle, right? So we're not just talking about survival limiting climate stress. It could also be that there may not be enough heat for it to complete life cycle. So that's another thing to consider when we're thinking about establishment, the ability to establish. Okay, so as a third example, I'll show you some forecasts for the emerald ash borer, also known as EAB, Agrillus planipennis. So EAB is a very small, shiny green beetle. It's native to Asia, and it's been in the US since at least 2002. It was probably there earlier. It's first found in Michigan. It's now present in 36 US states and 5 Canadian provinces. And the insect has destroyed millions of ash trees since it was first detected. Up to 99% of ash trees are killed within 8 to 10 years of the beetle arriving. So you can see in these photos, comparing June 2006 to August 2009, it happens pretty quickly where these trees just die. So it's primarily the immature stages that cause the most damage. So they're feeding on the heartwood of the ash tree. Unfortunately, as many of you may know, emerald ash borer was found on the West Coast for the first time just a couple of years ago. So this pink circle right here on this map, the green area on this map is the approximate range of Oregon ash or Fraxinus latifolia. And it's unfortunately, there is some work suggesting that emerald ash borer could lead to the functional loss of Oregon ash, at least in the Willamette Valley, where we have found the ash borer. So it's a very serious problem. We want to do whatever we can to detect this pest early, to at least like slow its spread, even if we can't like prevent its spread, at least like slow it. So yeah. So here's some forecasts for emerald ash borer first adult emergence for this year. Okay, so again, kind of similar to the spotted lanternfly, we see that there are no areas of the northern US where emerald ash borer could not establish. This particular species has a very high cold tolerance. So emerald ash borer can survive temperatures of like negative 32 degrees Celsius, very cold tolerant. If you go look at, I have a publication on this model, and I actually looked at like parts of Canada to see where it could establish. And anyway, if you want to learn more about this model, you can go to the website and find the paper. But in any case, this map right here showing adult emergence, we see that there is a small area of the southwestern US where it potentially would be excluded by heat stress. Notice again, we're seeing these white areas like the spotted lanternfly model. So this could indicate that adults would not emerge based on heat accumulation for this year. Emerald ash borer can have a 2-year life cycle in some areas, so it's possible maybe it could overwinter again as a larva in some of these areas. But in any case, again, here, just kind of pointing out to you that the ability to complete the life cycle is also an important component of establishment. So up in Oregon, notice up here how first adult emergence was predicted for June and July, or like June, July. It actually turns out that someone last year that was looking at our forecast, this forecast was accurate within like 3 days. So that was really exciting that hopefully, at least for Oregon, it looks like these forecasts could be really useful. So the reason I'm showing you forecasts for adults is that the adult stage is targeted for surveillance. The immature stages of emerald ash borer are inside of the trees. So knowing when to expect the adults is really important, because if you miss them, then you're going to have to wait another year before those adults come out again. And that gives it more time to build up its population and potentially begin spreading to new areas. Okay, so I also want to show you something cool. We have collaborators at the USA National Phenology Network who are helping us with some of our models, specifically with doing outreach and getting people to actually use our model forecasts, and also help gathering data that we can use for validating the forecast. They have put the emerald ash borer model up on their page, and we're soon going to have the spotted lanternfly model at USA National Phenology Network as well. They have a visualization tool there that you can access. And so I'm going to show a video of that where I am going to select the pheno forecast. So they call them pheno forecasts for emerald ash borer adult. So we have one for emerald ash borer adults and emerald ash borer egg hatch. And I'm going to pause it right here because I just want to show you. Oh, whoopsie. Oh dear. Sorry about that. Let me fast forward here. So notice that the way that they're showing their forecast is a little differently than what I've been showing you so far. They show it relative to the current day. So if you live, this map was produced on April 7th, 2023. If you live like near Dallas, so if you like kind of look at Dallas on this map, that means that adult emergence has already happened maybe like last month, or potentially a little north of Dallas, it's happening this week. So they're just showing it a little bit differently. And I'm interested to hear from you all, like what kind of format you would prefer. Like, do you like this kind of format, or do you like seeing the dates, for example? But anyway, I just wanted to show you though how you can like zoom into this map. You can zoom and you can select individual pixels. So you can kind of drag to the area that you're interested in and then click on it. So I'm dragging it over to Forest Grove. So that says June 24th, 2023. Now I'm going to look at emerald ash borer egg hatch. Kind of do the same thing where I zoom in over to Forest Grove near Portland, where emerald ash borer is found. Kind of click in that same area, and it says that egg hatch occurs on August 2nd, 2023. Okay, so anyway, it's a cool tool. We're going to have the spotted lanternfly forecast will be available pretty soon, where you can do the same thing. Okay, so we have done some validation analyses of DDRP. I'll just kind of skim over this a little bit, but basically we have found evidence that it's predicting phenology pretty well, at least for the emerald ash borer. So this plot right here is showing predicted day of year on the y-axis, observed day of year on the x-axis. And these are different phenological events, the different shapes here. So notice that the adult emergence, so adult emergence and then adult activity, these adult events, they have a mean absolute error of about a week. So that basically means that they are accurate to within about a week of the observations. So the closer these shapes are to this one-to-one line, this diagonal black line here, the more accurately the model is predicting that event. Okay, so we do have pretty good evidence that the model's at least predicting accurately for adult events. We also conducted some other validation analyses. This is just one of them. We also found evidence for good model performance for climate suitability. So I have done analyses for 4 different invasive insect species. And for all of those analyses, DDRP was correctly predicting presence for over 98% of the records. Just as an example here, I'm showing a climate suitability map for light brown apple moth produced using DDRP. So what I did here is I ran the model for 9 recent years, so climate data for 9 different years. And then I quantified the number of records, so these observation records for light brown apple moth. I quantified how many times they were not excluded by climate stress. So in this map here, the yellow areas indicate that DDRP predicted presence across all 9 modeled years. Areas that are gray were predicted to be unsuitable, so it was excluded by cold or heat stress across all 9 modeled years. So basically, the main point I wanted you to take away from this is that if you look at these little circles here, that's where the the light brown apple moth records were from. You'll see that most of them fall in these yellow areas. So that means that DDRP was correctly predicting presence in those areas. There are a few that were not correctly predicted, but who knows? Maybe there was irrigation, maybe there was shade. Like we don't really know, but for the most part, it's correctly predicting presence. Okay, so now pest forecast for Hawaii. So you may be wondering, okay, how will this help me? Especially those of you who are in the Hawaiian Islands. So I was really shocked. Well, I guess I wasn't too shocked, but I was, it's like, ah, man, that sucks. So Hawaii has half of the world's 100 worst invasive species. That's just like, that's really pretty terrible. Right. So, definitely there's a need for decision support models, decision support tools in general for invasive species in Hawaii. Climate change may increase risk. So, for example, climate suitability may start to increase at these higher elevations, such as on the main island, where there's a lot of topographic complexity that could potentially lead to range expansion of certain invasive species. So I could see how a modeling tool like DDRP might be useful. The problem for Hawaii is that there is a lack, to my knowledge, there is a lack of real-time climate data for Hawaii. So as I mentioned, we're using the PRISM climate database for our rasters, our climate data, and those are not, the real-time data are not available for Hawaii. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some forecasts that I made created using DayMet, so data from the DayMet data set. So DayMet is available for the most recent calendar year. So there's going to be at least a few month lag. So these are not going to be forecasts for 2024. I'm actually going to show you forecasts for 2022 because the 2023 data aren't available yet. They should, well, at least last time I checked, they might be available now. But anyway, that's one of the problems for Hawaii at the moment. Unless any of you know of something that I don't. Maybe there is real-time climate data. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm going to show you a forecast for Christmas berry webworm based on climate data for 2022. Okay, so according to the forecast in 2022, notice that there is climate stress up at these really high elevations of Maui and the Big Island of Hawaii. So that could indicate that potentially these areas may be safe or may have a low likelihood of establishment. And if we're looking at first appearance of adults, we see that for the most part, that event is predicted in January and February. As we get into these higher elevations, it's occurring a little later in the year. So what I want to know from any of you is how can these forecasts maybe help you manage the Christmas berry webworm? I don't know. I'm curious if any of you out there work on this species. I'd be interested to know. But the good news is it does look like maybe potentially cold stress might prevent spread into these high elevation areas. Okay, spotted lanternfly. I'm showing you here some forecasts of first egg hatch for 2022. Notice here that there are no areas where the pest would be excluded by climate stress. However, if you look up the tops of Maui and the Big Island here, we do see that there's insufficient degree days for first egg hatch to occur. So that potentially could be good news. That could mean that maybe spotted lanternfly can't complete its life cycle in those areas. But for the rest of the island, we do see that based on this climate data for this year, that nymphs would be appearing in January, February, March, and potentially as late as like these summer months at these high elevations. I also just wanted to show first appearance of adults. Just for fun, I produce a forecast for adults too. So adults obviously occurring a little bit later in the year. We see you'd expect adults for the most part between March and June. Again, insufficient degree days at these higher elevations in Maui and Hawaii. So yeah, that might be good news for you all. Okay, so just a wrap up here, I'll talk about future work and the key points. Okay, so what we're working on right now is adding moisture factors to DDRP to potentially improve modeling of weeds, plant pathogens, and certain like soil dwelling insects or insects that are highly moisture dependent. Obviously, moisture is very important for plant growth. This picture right here is showing cheatgrass. So we have senescence, dead cheatgrass. As soon as it starts raining again in the winter, we have green up. I am working on incorporating soil moisture active passive remote sensing data into DDRP. These data are available in near real time. I think there's like a 3-day lag. But anyway, I'm hoping that these will potentially allow us to model invasive plants. As a prototype, we have created a version of DDRP that incorporates relative humidity and precipitation, and we have made this model for boxwood blight. Okay, so that invasive fungal pathogen that I was talking about earlier. These maps right here are showing infection risk and climate suitability. So instead of showing phenology, this version of DDRP models infection risk. Areas that have these warm colors, this indicates that outbreaks are going to be more likely in those areas. Notice that we have cold stress, heat stress, and dry stress, okay? So the 3 different stress factors. And not surprisingly, at least based on previous work and what we know about this pathogen, outbreaks are going to be more likely in these kind of like eastern, more humid climates in the eastern United States. However, this pathogen is still spreading. So we do see there is risk of outbreaks too in the Pacific Northwest, for example, in parts of California. So hopefully these forecasts can inform surveillance and management decisions to control outbreaks and prevent spread of this pathogen. We're developing new models. So we're developing a model for Japanese beetle, cheatgrass, yellow star thistle, invasive plant pathogens. We're going to start working on 3 different monolinea species that cause brown rot. We're also going to be working on a model for biological control insect, rosette weevil, which attacks yellow star thistle. So I have a newly funded project that is going to support all this work with the star thistle system. So one of the things we're going to do is look at phenological synchrony across the potential range of the rosette weevil to see if we can optimize biocontrol for this system. Okay, so the USA National Phenology Network is largely involved with recruiting, training, and engaging potential end users. And we're going to have modules, or we've already created some modules that help interpret forecasts and help with submitting observations that we can use to validate the phenology models. Oops, sorry. And then we also want to gather feedback to improve the formats of our forecasts and the types of deliveries that we're offering. I forgot to mention that you can also sign up for email notification at the USA National Phenology Network. Anyway, I put this like SpongeBob picture here because my son loves SpongeBob, but basically we want everyone to we want people to actually use these and have a good experience using them so that they'll keep using them, right? Okay, key points. I hope I convinced you how integrated decision support models can potentially help you to detect invasive species early and help control them. Phenology models help us know when to expect a life stage targeted by surveillance or management. Climate suitability models help us know where to focus our search efforts. And also, I want to point out here that we really need to have these dynamic modeling tools. Climate is changing very rapidly. This map right here from the New York Times is showing 2022 average temperature anomalies compared with the 1981 to 2010 baseline. So most of the globe in 2022 had temperatures that were much warmer than that baseline. Phenological events may occur earlier in pests, meaning that they, what happened 10 years ago may not be happening today, right? So we need to have these regularly updated forecasts. Also, establishment risk may be increasing in cold areas. So, for example, in Hawaii, on the main island, you could have elevational shifts in pest ranges. Also, like in CONUS, we could have latitudinal shifts in ranges. Also, we could have changes in phenology of interacting species. So we could have a lack of synchrony in species that are dependent on each other. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for your time. You can access the forecast, uspest.org/caps, pheno forecast. Here's a link here. I'd like to acknowledge all my collaborators, especially Len Coop, who's really involved in all this work. And if you're interested in collaborating, if you want to write a grant together, I'd love to. Just reach out to me. And I, of course, acknowledge all my funding sources. Thank you.